10 kilometers above the Earth, engine explosion, a shattered window, and a woman being sucked outside. What happened on board Flight 1380 sounds like the plot of a disaster movie, but it's reality captured on video. On April 17, 2018, a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737-700 was performing a multi-hour flight from New York to Dallas. On board were 144 passengers and 5 crew members. On that fateful day, among those flying was 43-year-old Jennifer Riordan, a bank branch director. She took a seat in the middle part of the cabin, and for her, it was a routine business trip between cities. Neither the passengers nor the experienced crew could have imagined what this standard flight would turn into. Just minutes after reaching altitude, their lives would be divided in two, and what happened to Jennifer is beyond comprehension. Music. For the Riordan family, it was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. Early in the morning, while in a New York hotel, Jennifer dialed the number of her husband, Michael, just to find out how his day had gone and what the family would do that evening. Outside the hotel window, it was only just beginning to get light. The city below hummed muffledly, and Jennifer sat on the edge of the bed with the phone to her ear, listening to a familiar voice. The family of 4 Michael, his wife Jennifer, their daughter Avery, and son Joshua lived in the large city of Albuquerque. But at that moment, Jennifer was on a business trip. She held the position of vice president of the financial holding company Wells Fargo, and was also the executive director of a bank in Albuquerque. A high position in the corporation required regular flights between cities. Such trips had long since become a part of her life, packing a suitcase on autopilot, the familiar ritual of passing through security, the smell of coffee in waiting lounges, airports, planes, hotels, everything merged into one endless business routine. On that morning of April 17th, the bank director was preparing to fly to Dallas, and from their home to her family in Albuquerque. She spoke with the children on the phone. Their voices were sleepy and warm. Avery was telling something about school. Joshua muttered, "Bye, Mom," and ran off. Ending the conversation with her husband, Jennifer wished him a good day. "I love you. Have a safe flight," Michael replied. The spouses hung up. An ordinary exchange of phrases they had spoken hundreds of times. Nothing special. Their last conversation. About an hour later, Jennifer left the hotel and headed to LaGuardia Airport, rushing to catch Flight 1380, Southwest Airlines. Flight 1380 was a scheduled route from LaGuardia Airport to Dallas Love Field Airport, Texas. The flight was operated by a modern Boeing 737-700. The travel time was 4 hours and 15 minutes. A reliable machine, proven by thousands of flights. The workhorse of American aviation. The captain of the aircraft was 56-year-old Tammy Jo Schultz. She had 11,111 flight hours behind her, 10,513 of them on the Boeing 737. In the past, she was a U.S. Navy fighter pilot and flight instructor, a person who knew this machine like her own body. Every sound of the engine, every vibration of the control yoke, every shade of the turbine's hum. The first officer was 44-year-old Darren Lee Ellisor, a former U.S. Air Force pilot with a total of 9,508 flying hours, including 6,627 hours on the Boeing 737. Both were veterans of the sky. 3 flight attendants were assigned to the flight: Rachel Fernheimer, Shanique Mallory, and Catherine Sandoval. The aircraft performing the flight had been operated by Southwest Airlines for almost 18 years, since its manufacture in 2000. The machine was equipped with 2 CFM56-7B turbofan engines. 18 years is a lot. Thousands of takeoff and landing cycles, thousands of hours of vibration, pressure drops, and thermal loads. Metal gets tired, micro cracks grow, but on the outside, nothing. Shiny skin, fresh paint. No one thought about material fatigue then. 10:15 a.m., LaGuardia Airport, New York. 144 passengers board the flight to Dallas. The cabin smells of recirculated air and cleaning agent, that very recognizable smell of air travel that calms some and irritates others. Southwest Airlines does not provide the option to choose a seat when booking, so the best seats in the front of the cabin go to the quickest. The rest take what's left. A silent lottery. University professor Holly Mackey didn't manage to be among the first this time. and took seat 14C in the middle of the cabin, opposite the wing. She could have chosen any seat, including a window seat. The adjacent seats were empty, but she sat by the aisle. After 2 cups of coffee, she would need to go to the toilet frequently, and she didn't want to disturb other passengers. A small thing. A random choice dictated by caffeine and politeness. In 20 minutes, this choice would save her life. Jennifer Riordan appeared a little later and took seat 14A by the window. She took out a book and looked out the window. Beyond the thick acrylic glass was the gray concrete field of the airport, a line of planes on the taxiway, the flashing lights of service vehicles. Nothing interesting. A familiar sight. Holly and Jennifer's neighbor was a young girl who hardly looked up from her phone. She sat in seat 14B in the middle between the 2 women and put on headphones, completely immersed in her own world. 3 strangers in 1 row, 3 fates that in a few minutes would intertwine in the most terrible way. The flight attendants conducted the standard safety briefing, the one that no one listens to: how to buckle the belt, where the emergency exits are, how to put on an oxygen mask, first on yourself, then on the child. The gestures are practiced to the point of automatism. The words sound monotonous. Passengers looked at their phones, read, dozed. Someone had already closed their eyes, preparing to sleep through the entire flight. Seatbelts were fastened. The plane prepared for takeoff. At 10:43 a.m., according to schedule, the Boeing 737 lifted off the runway. Bodies were pressed into the seats. The familiar sensation of G-force that takes one's breath away slightly. The engines roared at full power. Vibration passed through the floor, through the seats, through the spine. The ground outside the windows rapidly receded. First the concrete of the runway, then the greenery of the suburbs, then rooftops the size of matchboxes, then clouds. The plane gained speed and altitude, climbing to a flight level of 11 kilometers. The first minutes passed normally. The crew retracted the landing gear, a dull thud somewhere under the floor, a light jolt. The machine followed the route, gradually gaining the assigned altitude. The captain reported to the dispatcher. Departure and climb are proceeding normally, without problems. The voice was calm, professional, and indeed, for the first 10-15 minutes, nothing portended that this flight would become anything other than an ordinary trip. The engine vibration was steady, familiar, almost soothing. A light hum in the ears from the climb. Outside the windows, dazzling white clouds and the blue of the sky. Meanwhile, the 3 flight attendants moved slowly through the cabin, offering passengers tea, coffee, soft drinks, and light snacks. The clinking of the cart against the floor, the rustle of packaging, muffled voices. Tea or coffee, juice, crackers? Someone had already dozed off, leaning back in their seat. Someone was reading. Someone was watching a movie on a tablet. An ordinary flight. 20 minutes after takeoff, at 11:03, the plane reached the 10-kilometer mark and continued to climb. Suddenly, there was a deafening bang. Not just a sound, an impact. As if someone had struck the hull from the outside with a sledgehammer. The plane shook violently. The floor underfoot began to heave. Glasses on the tables jumped, splashing their contents. Books and phones flew to the floor. Someone screamed a sharp, frightened sound. The left engine failed, but failed is too mild a word for what happened. The engine exploded from the inside. Fan blade number 13, in which a fatigue crack had been growing for years, invisible, unnoticed during any inspection, finally gave way. It detached at full RPM and struck the engine casing with monstrous force. Metal fragments flew in all directions like shrapnel from a grenade. They hit the fuselage and the wing, piercing the aluminum skin, leaving jagged holes. But one of the large fragments, a piece of the cowl latch about the size of a fist, hit the row 14 window with such force that the acrylic glass was literally torn outward. It didn't crack, it didn't break, it vanished. A hole gaped in the side of the plane. This was the window next to Jennifer Riordan. Everything happened in a fraction of a second. In one moment, peace and quiet, the steady hum of engines, the smell of coffee. In the next, hell. Due to the colossal pressure difference inside and outside the cabin, the air rushed out with a wild howl, a whistle so strong it makes the ears pop. Jennifer, who was sitting right by the window, was sucked headfirst into the resulting hole in a matter of seconds. She was literally being turned inside out. The force of the decompression was such that the seatbelt dug into her stomach, holding her body and leaving deep bruises, but her upper torso was already outside. Her head, shoulders, one arm there in the icy hell outside. Outside, it was minus 50 degrees, a temperature at which exposed skin freezes in seconds. The airspeed was 900 kilometers per hour, a wind of such force that it knocks you off your feet, tears clothes, doesn't let you breathe. The air was so thin that the lungs could not extract oxygen from it. The human body is not made for such conditions. It cannot withstand them. Uncontrolled decompression filled the cabin with an unbearable roar, whistling, roaring, howling, a sound that makes your ears pop and takes your breath away, making you want to cover your ears and scream. Although Jennifer's body almost completely plugged the opening, air still rushed inside through the gaps, icy, cutting, burning, with cold. The temperature in the cabin dropped instantly. Steam began coming from the passengers' mouths. Everything happened almost instantaneously. 11 seconds later, the plane banked 41 degrees to the left, almost on its side. Unsecured objects flew through the cabin. A beverage cart rolled down the aisle. Screams broke out in the cabin, shrieks, crying. Someone prayed aloud, confusedly, feverishly. Someone called for their mother. Oxygen masks automatically dropped from the compartments overhead. Yellow rubber bags dangled on hoses, swaying from the turbulence, hitting faces. But in this chaos and horror, few noticed what was happening in the 14th row. Everyone was occupied with their own fear, their own survival, their own panic. The flight attendants grabbed portable oxygen cylinders, heavy yellow cylinders, and, as best they could, began to make their way through the tilting cabin. Walking was almost impossible. The floor was slipping away. The angle of the bank threw their bodies to the side. They grabbed onto the backs of seats, squeezed between panicking passengers, stepped over fallen bags. The plane continued to bank heavily to the left. A drama of its own was unfolding in the cockpit. At the moment of the engine failure, First Officer Darren Ellisor was holding the controls, and Captain Tammy Schultz was monitoring the situation. Within 5 seconds, several alarms went off. The control panel lit up red and yellow like a Christmas tree. Fire warnings, pressure drop, engine loss, depressurization. Sound signals overlapped, merging into a cacophony, beeping, humming, a mechanical voice. Altitude, altitude. The air pressure in the cockpit dropped sharply. Their ears popped instantly as if diving deep underwater. Their temples were squeezed. Both pilots hurried to put on oxygen masks, bulky ones with thick hoses. Their hands worked on autopilot. Thousands of hours of training had driven these movements into muscle memory. Mask on face. Tighten the straps. Check oxygen supply. But in the commotion, they struggled to activate the built-in microphones that allowed them to talk to each other. A few precious seconds, silence in the headphones, only their own heavy breathing under the mask. The hiss of oxygen, the heartbeat in their temples. Unable to contact the captain, the first officer made the decision independently, no hesitation, no doubt. He reduced the power of both engines and began an emergency descent. Pushed the yoke forward. The nose of the plane dropped. The machine went down. A feeling of weightlessness arose in the stomach like on a roller coaster, only scarier. A few seconds later, the crew shut off the fuel supply to the left engine, completing the shutdown procedure. A clear sequence of actions, checklist after checklist, confirming each item by voice, flipping toggle switches, checking instrument readings. Hands moved quickly, but without haste. It was like a surgical operation. Every movement calculated, every second counting. During this time, the air traffic controller tried to contact the crew twice. No response. On the air, only noise and static. The controller frowned and repeated the call. Silence. Flight 1380 was descending at maximum speed, more than 1.5 kilometers per minute. A rapid fall. The altimeter needle raced down. Ears were popping more and more. The pressure was changing too quickly. The eardrums didn't have time to adapt. A feeling like an elevator is flying down without stopping. Like the floor is dropping out from under your feet and not returning. Fast enough that passengers unfamiliar with emergency procedures decided the plane is crashing and they are going to die right now, in a few minutes, in a few seconds. Someone prayed. Lips moved silently under the oxygen mask. Tears flowed down cheeks. Someone cried out loud, sobs, gasps, lamentations. Someone sat motionless, clutching the armrests with white knuckles. In a stupor, the body shut down. The brain refused to process what was happening. Someone connected to the onboard Wi-Fi to send final messages to loved ones. Trembling fingers on the phone screen, typos, tears dripping onto the screen, blurring the letters. Some, in despair, wrote farewell SMS with words of love, believing that this was the end. I love you. Take care of the children. Forgive me for everything. I didn't have time to say messages that were meant to be the last, which recipients would read only afterward. One of the passengers, Marty Martinez, began a live stream from the cabin to social media. He paid $8 for Wi-Fi to say goodbye, while the plane, as it seemed to him, was falling. The phone camera captured the chaos-swaying masks, screaming people, flashing lights, faces distorted with horror. A video that would later go around the world, which would be rewatched millions of times. But in reality, the pilots had complete control of the situation. They were descending the aircraft as fast as safety allowed. This was not a fall. This was an emergency maneuver, an emergency descent. They needed to get down as quickly as possible to an altitude where they could breathe without masks, where the pressure wouldn't kill, where the cold wouldn't freeze. Simultaneously, they performed several emergency checklists confirming each item by voice, flipping toggle switches, checking instrument readings, working in 4 hands, synchronous, refined. The plane was under control, though, with difficulty. Maintaining controlled flight required constant pressure on the yoke to compensate for the asymmetric thrust and drag of the destroyed engine. The machine was constantly trying to roll to the left, where fragments protruded instead of a working turbine. The pilot's hands worked non-stop, muscles strained, sweat under the mask. Having descended to 4 kilometers, about 6 minutes after the failure, Captain Schultz took over the controls. Her voice on the air was calm, a steady professional tone, as if she were reading a weather forecast, rather than fighting for the lives of 150 people. She contacted the dispatcher and requested a course change. Initially, the captain planned a long approach, a standard, safe, and proven procedure. However, a few seconds later, the flight attendant contacted her over the intercom. Her voice was breaking, trembling. "We have a broken window. Someone is halfway out." A pause. A second of silence in the cockpit. Upon learning this, Tammy Jo Schultz made an instantaneous decision to accelerate the approach. Every second counted. Every minute was someone's life. She decided that Philadelphia Airport was best prepared for such an emergency. It had all the necessary equipment, medics, rescuers, and fire trucks. The dispatcher immediately transmitted the coordinates and cleared the airspace. All other planes were moved aside. Absolute priority. The runway was waiting. Music chaos reigned in the cabin. When flight attendant Rachel Fernheimer reached the middle of the cabin, stumbling, grabbing seats, struggling with the tilt, she saw Jennifer, a sight that made her blood run cold, a sight that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. The woman was still buckled in at the waist, the fabric cut into her stomach, keeping her body inside the cabin. But her head, part of her torso, and an arm were hanging out of the window. Her body beat against the side of the plane from the wind helpless, like a rag doll. Her hair was flying, her clothes were tearing, her face was already blue from the cold and lack of oxygen. Her eyes were open, but there was nothing in them. Emptiness. At the flight attendant's request, the passengers from seats 14B and 14C, the girl with the phone and Holly Mackey moved. They unbuckled with trembling, uncooperative hands and moved to other seats, clearing the space. Their faces were white. Their lips were shaking. After that, 2 flight attendants tried to pull Jennifer back in. They grabbed her clothes, her belt, her arm, and pulled with all their might. But the powerful airflow pinned her body against the side of the aircraft with monstrous force. It was as if a giant was holding her from the outside. The wind howled in the opening, burned their hands with cold, and ripped the clothing from their fingers. Impossible. Not enough strength. 2 passengers from the adjacent 15th row men, strong and grown, rushed to help, without hesitation. They leaned over the seatbacks, gripped Jennifer, one by the arm, one by the belt, one by her clothes. 4 people against the force of decompression, muscles burned from the strain, Fingers went numb from the cold. The wind lashed their faces, forcing tears from their eyes. Pull more, harder. Through their combined efforts, they managed to overcome the force of the wind and pull Jennifer inside. A jolt, a final effort on the edge of the possible, and her body was finally in the cabin. It fell onto the seats. Limp, motionless. The flight attendants laid her across a row of seats and began to provide first aid. They checked for breathing. None. Pulse none. They began CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Rhythmic compressions on the chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. More compressions. Sweat on their foreheads. Aching hands. Do not stop. But Jennifer did not react. Her eyes were open but empty. Her body did not respond. After 17 excruciating minutes, the longest minutes in the lives of everyone on board, at 11:20 a.m., Flight 1380 finally touched the runway of Philadelphia International Airport. The landing gear hit the concrete a hard jolt. The roar of the remaining engine's reverse thrust, a deafening but now life-saving sound. The braking pushed the passengers into their seats. The plane slowed, jerked, bounced over bumps, and finally stopped. Silence. A strange ringing silence after all that hell. And then applause. Loud, hysterical, uncontrollable. Passengers clapped, cried, hugged each other. Strangers, seatmates, flight attendants. They thanked the crew. They thanked God. They thanked fate. They thanked everyone and everything in the world for being alive. As soon as the stairs were brought to the plane, medics boarded running, with stretchers, with equipment. They headed straight for the 14th row, where Jennifer lay, where CPR was still being performed. Jennifer was rushed to a Philadelphia hospital, flashing lights, sirens, speed, every second counted. 8 other passengers sustained minor injuries, cuts from shards, bruises from falls, shock. They were also examined, bandaged, and comforted. Sometime later, Michael Reardon received a call from the hospital where his wife had been taken. The phone rang. On, ordinary ring, unremarkable. Michael answered. First, he was told that Jennifer was there and a doctor needed to speak with him. The voice on the other end was cautious, too soft. That's how people speak when they are afraid to say the main thing. Please wait a minute. I will connect you with a doctor. 2 minutes later, the longest 2 minutes of his life. The doctor called back. I'm sorry. We did everything possible, but we couldn't save her. A pause the length of eternity. The world stopped. That call turned Michael's life upside down. He simply dropped the receiver. The phone hit the floor, the clatter of plastic on tile. The world around him ceased to exist. Only those words remained, ringing in his head, refusing to form a meaning. They couldn't save her. They couldn't. Jennifer. No. Jennifer Reardon became the only victim of the incident, and the first person to die as a result of an accident on a flight of a U.S. airline since 2009. 9 years without a single victim, and then this. 2 weeks after the incident, on April 30th, the Boeing 737-700 was delivered to the airline's service center for repair. Mechanics inspected the damage, a torn engine with protruding blades, holes in the fuselage, the skin in tatters, a missing window, traces of blood on the skin around the window. They decided not to repair it. Impractical. Too much damage, too many memories. About a month later, the plane was placed in storage at a logistics center, where it remains to this day. A silent monument to the tragedy. A reminder of that day. At that time, this aircraft was one of 700 Boeing 737s in the Southwest Airlines fleet. This specific machine had come off the assembly line in 2000 and had been operated only by this airline ever since. Its 2 CFM56-7B jet engines were even older. The one that failed was manufactured in 1997. 21 years of service, thousands of flights, hundreds of thousands of passengers, and all that time, a tiny crack was growing inside fan blade number 13, millimeter by millimeter, cycle by cycle, each takeoff a bit longer, each landing a bit deeper, invisible, imperceptible, undetected during any maintenance inspection, until it was too late. On November 19, 2019, the National Transportation Safety Board published the final report on the incident. The dry lines of an official document. It stated, the probable cause was a fatigue crack in fan blade number 13. As a result, the blade separated in flight and struck the engine fan case with enormous force. This collision led to the separation of cowl components, including the aft latch, which struck the fuselage near the row 14 window. A small crack, a big tragedy. One blade out of dozens, one window out of 100. One woman out of 144 passengers. On May 1, 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump hosted the crew members and several passengers at a ceremony in the Oval Office of the White House. Cameras, journalists, flashes. He thanked them for their heroism, handshakes, smiles, commemorative photos. Tammy Jo Schultz, the flight commander, stood before the cameras calm, composed, in uniform. She was just doing her job, she said later in an interview. What she was trained to do. Nothing heroic, just a job. As compensation, Southwest Airlines paid each passenger $5,000 and provided a $1,000 voucher for future flights. Money for the horror they endured, for the minutes that seemed to be their last, for the nightmares that would haunt them later, the whistle of the wind, the screams, the swinging masks, for the fear that would now return with every takeoff. That day will forever remain in the memory of the crew and passengers of Flight 1380. 20 minutes that changed everything. A random choice of seat by the window, by the aisle, in the middle. A crack in the metal that no one noticed. A coincidence that was impossible to predict. According to statistics, the airplane remains the safest mode of transport. The chance of dying in a plane crash is 1 in several million. The figures are reassuring. The graphs are convincing. But for Jennifer Reardon, that chance 1 in millions came up. Sometimes fate is just a window seat.